the augur readings made no sense. Magos explorator Vex 7 had surveyed hundreds of dead worlds in his 3 centuries of service to the Omnissiah, but he'd never encountered mineral resonance patterns quite like these. The planet designated TX-779 appeared on all scans as a lifeless ball of rust-colored sand and shattered rock, another forgotten casualty of time's relentless passage. Yet deep beneath that barren surface, his instruments detected geometric anomalies. Perfect right angles where nature preferred curves, vast hollow spaces that formed chambers rather than caverns, and strangest of all, faint energy signatures that pulsed with mathematical precision, like the heartbeat of some sleeping god. Vex 7 filed his initial report with cautious optimism. Perhaps this was an ancient human colony from the dark age of technology. Perhaps they would discover functional STC templates or forgotten manufacturing protocols. Perhaps this would be the discovery that elevated him to Archmagos. He authorized the deployment of excavation servitors and activated the ground-penetrating surveyor equipment. What Magos Vex 7 could not have known, what no amount of Imperial technology could have warned him about, was that his first scan had triggered something far below. Ancient protocols, dormant for 60 million years, flickered to life in response to the electromagnetic probing. Deep within the planet's core, in chambers that existed partially outside normal space-time, maintenance routines began their assessment. The tomb mind of TX-779 registered the surface activity and initiated defensive protocols. Canoptek scarabs stirred in their alcoves, tomb spiders powered their anti-gravitic engines, and in stasis crypts extending for hundreds of kilometers in every direction, the first Necron warriors began the slow process of reanimation. Vex 7 and his expedition team had 72 hours before the screaming started. This is what happens when you discover a Necron tomb world. And in the grim darkness of the far future, this discovery is being made with increasing frequency across the galaxy. Thousands of Imperial worlds, some settled for millennia, exist in blissful ignorance of the ancient machinery buried beneath their cities and farmlands. Adeptus Mechanicus expeditions probe the surfaces of supposedly dead planets, seeking archaeotech and alien relics. Miners dig deeper into mountainsides, chasing ore veins toward depths they were never meant to reach. Planetary governors approve construction projects that drive foundation pilings into substrata that have remained undisturbed since before humanity learned to walk upright. And with each incursion, with each disturbance of the ancient silence, the Necrons awaken. Not all at once. Not with the coordinated fury of a fully mobilized star empire, but piece by piece, tomb by tomb, dynasty by dynasty, they are returning. The skeletal legions that once ruled the galaxy, that made war against gods and won, are stirring from their long slumber. And they remember. They remember that this galaxy was theirs. They remember the empire they built across the stars. And they fully intend to reclaim what they believe is rightfully their dominion. To understand what happens when a Necron tomb world is discovered, we must first understand what these tombs are and why they exist. We must comprehend the scale of the threat they represent and the sheer impossibility of the technology they contain. We must recognize that these are not merely ancient burial sites or dormant installations. These are military installations of a civilization that achieved technological supremacy over the galaxy 60 million years before the Imperium of man drew its first breath. These are the sleeping fortresses of a species that shed their mortal forms to achieve immortality, only to discover that eternal existence might be the cruelest fate of all. The story of the Necron tomb worlds begins not in the present age of the 41st millennium, but in an epoch so distant that it predates all current galactic civilizations. It begins with the Necrontyr, a species of flesh and blood who lived short, brutal lives under the harsh radiation of dying suns. Unlike humanity, who spread across worlds bathed in the light of stable stars, the Necrontyr evolved on worlds poisoned by solar radiation. Their lives were characterized by constant suffering, by cancers that riddled their flesh and genetic damage that ensured each generation was weaker than the last. They gazed up at the stars, not with wonder, but with envy and rage, seeing in those distant lights the promise of peace that would forever be denied them. In their desperation to escape their cursed existence, the Necrontyr turned their considerable intellect toward the development of technology. They became masters of material science and physics. They mapped the fundamental forces of the universe and learned to manipulate them with precision that would make even the most accomplished tech priests of Mars weep with jealousy. They built an empire that spanned the galaxy, not through the warp as other species would later do, but through the simple application of physics, so advanced it might as well have been sorcery. Yet for all their achievements, they could not solve the one problem that mattered most to them. They could not escape death. The Necrontyr's search for immortality led them into contact with beings of immense power, creatures that fed upon the electromagnetic radiation of stars themselves. These beings, whom the Necrontyr called the Satan or star gods, seemed to offer a solution. Through a process called biotransference, the Satan promised to transfer the consciousness of every Necrontyr into bodies of living metal, granting them the immortality they so desperately sought. What the Necrontyr could not comprehend, what their desperation blinded them to, was the true cost of this transformation. When they emerged from the Kjolnthn, furnaces of biotransference, they discovered they had not achieved immortality, but had instead damned themselves to an existence worse than the death they feared. The living metal bodies they now inhabited were indeed immortal and impervious to the decay that had plagued their organic forms. But something essential had been lost in the transfer. The Necrontyr had possessed souls, that ineffable quality that made them more than just thinking machines. Those souls, that vital spark of consciousness that connected them to the deeper currents of the universe, had been consumed by the Satan as payment for the transformation. What remained were beings that could think and act, but could not truly feel. They retained their memories and their skills, their tactical acumen and their ambition. But the emotions that had driven them, the passions and fears and loves that had made life worth living, even in the shadow of death, those were gone forever. In their new forms, the Necrons became the most devastating military force the galaxy had ever seen. They waged war against the Old Ones, an ancient race of powerful psychic beings who had refused to share the secret of immortality with the Necrontyr. This conflict, known as the War in Heaven, literally tore the fabric of reality and created the roiling nightmare dimension that would eventually become the realm of chaos. The Necrons proved unstoppable, their living metal bodies capable of self-repair, their weapons able to strip matter apart at the atomic level, their technology so advanced that it seemed to violate the fundamental laws of physics. But even victory came at a terrible price. The War in Heaven had damaged the galaxy beyond measure. The Imperium realm, once calm and suitable for travel, had become a hellscape of demons and malevolent entities. The Old Ones were destroyed, but the damage they had caused in their desperate attempt at survival would echo through the ages. And worse still, the Necrons realized they had been deceived and enslaved by the very Catan they had worshipped. The Star Gods saw their mechanical servants not as allies, but as tools to be used and discarded once their usefulness had ended. The Silent King, the supreme ruler of all Necron dynasties, orchestrated a rebellion against their Catan masters. In a conflict that reshaped worlds and snuffed out stars, the Necrons shattered their gods into fragments and bound those fragments within tesseract labyrinths, prisons from which not even beings of near infinite power could escape. But the effort left the Necrons exhausted and facing a galaxy fundamentally changed from the one they had sought to conquer. New species were emerging, races with the potential to one day threaten even the Necrons' supremacy. And the warp storms caused by the War in Heaven made conventional galactic travel nearly impossible. Faced with these circumstances, the Silent King made a decision that would echo through the ages. The Necrons would enter into a period of dormancy, a great sleep that would allow the galaxy time to heal and new civilizations to rise and fall. When they awakened, the warp storms would have subsided, and their enemies would be primitives easily swept aside. They would reclaim their rightful place as masters of the galaxy, not through desperate warfare, but through methodical, overwhelming superiority. To facilitate this plan, the Silent King commanded that tomb complexes be constructed on millions of worlds across the galaxy. These would be no ordinary crypts, but vast underground installations capable of sustaining their inhabitants through millions of years of stasis. Every precaution was taken, every contingency planned for. Automated systems would maintain the tombs during the long sleep. Canoptek constructs would perform repairs and guard against intrusion. And when the time came to awaken, the process would be orderly and systematic, beginning with the lesser Necrons and gradually progressing to the noble houses and their overlords. In approximately the 800s in the 40th millennium, 60 million years after entering their great sleep, the Necrons began to stir. The awakening was far from the orderly process that had been planned. Millennia had taken their toll on even the most sophisticated technology. Some tomb worlds had been destroyed by cosmic disasters, their inhabitants lost forever to the void. Others had suffered catastrophic malfunctions, their Necrons awakening with their consciousness scattered, or their hierarchies broken beyond repair. And still others awoke to discover their worlds occupied by younger species, who had built civilizations on ground that the Necrons considered their ancestral territory. Yet despite these setbacks, the awakening continued. Tomb after tomb came online. Dynasty after dynasty stirred from slumber. And with each awakening, the galaxy became that much more dangerous for every other species struggling to survive in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. The Necron tomb worlds themselves represent perhaps the greatest achievement of their ancient civilization. These are not simple bunkers or underground shelters, but rather massive installations that stretch for hundreds of kilometers beneath the planet's surface. The architecture of a tomb world reflects principles of physics and engineering that remain far beyond the understanding of the Imperium's tech priests. Chambers exist that are larger on the inside than their external dimensions should allow. Corridors extend through space that should not exist according to conventional geometry. Energy flows through conduits made of materials that seem to violate thermodynamics by never degrading or losing efficiency. The tomb complexes are typically organized in a hierarchical structure that mirrors the rigid caste system of Necron society. At the deepest levels lie the stasis crypts of the noble houses, vast chambers where overlords and pharaohs sleep in ornate sarcophagi of black stone and living metal. These chambers are works of art, as much as functional spaces, decorated with glyphs that record the deeds and honors of their occupants. Above these noble crypts lie the quarters of the royal guards and elite warriors, the Lich Guard and Immortals, who served as the dynasty's most trusted soldiers. Higher still are the endless halls where the Necron warriors slumber. Millions upon millions of these basic soldiers arranged in perfect geometric patterns that extend into darkness so complete that even advanced optics struggle to penetrate it. Throughout these tomb complexes run the systems that maintain the Great Sleep. Power conduits pulse with energy drawn from the planet's core, or from exotic sources that tap into the fundamental forces of the universe. Stasis fields flicker around each sleeping Necron, holding them in temporal suspension, where entropy moves at a fraction of its normal pace. Data streams flow through crystalline matrices, carrying status reports and maintenance logs that update themselves every microsecond. And in the spaces between the major chambers, the Canoptek constructs patrol endlessly, their artificial intelligences driven by programming that has not wavered in 60 million years. Tomb worlds are generally categorized into 3 distinct types, each reflecting the importance of that world to its dynasty. Crown worlds represent the absolute pinnacle of Necron tomb construction. These were once the seats of power for entire dynasties, the hub worlds from which vast territories were administered and controlled. The tomb complexes on crown worlds were built with unlimited resources and the finest craftsmanship the Necron civilization could provide. Their stasis systems are virtually flawless, their power reserves seemingly inexhaustible. When crown worlds awaken, they do so with their inhabitants in near-perfect condition, their hierarchies intact, and their war machines fully functional. The Soltec dynasty's crown world of Mandragora represents perhaps the finest example of this type, having awakened with its forces so well preserved that Pharaon Imhotep, the Stormlord, was able to immediately begin coordinating military operations across multiple sectors. Core worlds form the bulk of Necron tomb installations scattered throughout the galaxy. These were the primary inhabited worlds of each dynasty, the planets where the majority of the Necron population lived and worked. While not as grand as the crown worlds, core worlds were still constructed with considerable care and allocated significant resources. Their tomb complexes are extensive and well maintained, capable of preserving millions of Necrons through the Great Sleep. Most core worlds wake with their forces largely intact, though they may experience higher rates of degradation among their warrior class and occasional malfunctions in their command hierarchies. Nevertheless, an awakening core world represents a significant military threat to any nearby civilizations. Fringe worlds occupy the lowest tier of the Necron tomb hierarchy. These were the distant outposts and newly colonized territories of the ancient Necrontire Empire, worlds that received minimal resources and attention when the tomb complexes were being constructed. The stasis facilities on fringe worlds are often inferior in quality, built quickly and with less sophisticated technology than their crown world or core world counterparts. As a result, fringe worlds experience the highest rates of catastrophic failure during the Great Sleep. Many wake to discover large portions of their population degraded into mindless automatons. Their hierarchies are often fragmented, with junior nobles forced to assume command when their superiors fail to revive. Yet, even a partially functional fringe world represents a deadly threat, for even degraded Necrons possess technology far beyond what most younger species can counter. The physical characteristics of Necron tomb worlds follow certain patterns, though exceptions exist. Many tomb worlds appear as barren desert planets, their surfaces scoured by time into endless expanses of rust-colored sand and wind-carved rock formations. Whether this barrenness resulted from the Necrons deliberately sterilizing their worlds before entering the Great Sleep, or whether these harsh environments were simply preferred by the ancient Necron tier, remains a subject of debate among Imperial scholars. What is certain is that these desolate landscapes serve the Necrons' purposes well. Few other species find such worlds appealing for colonization, allowing the tomb complexes beneath to remain undisturbed. And when awakening does occur, the lack of native life forms means the Necrons can focus their initial efforts on eliminating the specific threats that disturb their slumber, rather than dealing with planetary-scale conflicts against entrenched populations. However, not all tomb worlds appear dead and barren. Some exist beneath worlds that appear entirely ordinary, their tomb complexes buried so deep or shielded so effectively that they leave no trace on the surface. These hidden tomb worlds represent perhaps the greatest danger to the Imperium, for they can exist beneath long-settled planets where millions or even billions of humans have built their lives completely unaware of the ancient machinery sleeping below them. In some cases, the tomb complexes exist in pocket dimensions accessed through points in normal space, a feat of dimensional engineering that remains completely beyond Imperial understanding. In these instances, the physical structures of the tomb exist parallel to normal reality, occupying the same coordinates, but separated by a thin barrier between dimensions. Only when the awakening protocols activate do these pocket dimensions begin to merge with normal space, allowing the Necrons to emerge into the world they once claimed as their own. The hidden nature of many tomb worlds was a deliberate choice made during their construction. 60 million years ago, when the Great Sleep began, the galaxy was home to the Eldari civilization at the height of its power. The ancient Eldari, not yet fragmented into the various factions that exist in the current age, possessed significant military capability and had participated in the war in heaven as inheritors of the Old One's legacy. The Necrons recognized that leaving their tomb worlds obvious and exposed would invite attacks from these old enemies. Thus, many tomb complexes were designed specifically to avoid detection, hidden beneath layers of rock and shielded with technologies that rendered them invisible to most forms of scanning. This strategy proved largely successful. For millions of years, the sleeping Necrons remained undisturbed while the galaxy changed around them. But in the current age, with new civilizations pushing into every corner of known space, these ancient hiding places are being uncovered with increasing frequency. The discovery of a Necron tomb world typically begins in one of several ways. The most common scenario involves Adeptus Mechanicus Explorator teams conducting surveys of seemingly dead or abandoned worlds. The tech priests of Mars possess an insatiable hunger for ancient technology and lost knowledge. They dispatch expeditions to the furthest reaches of the galaxy, to systems that haven't been visited in millennia, or to planets that register as lifeless on long-range scans. These expeditions are hunting for archaeotech, the precious technological relics of humanity's lost golden age. They seek standard template construct databases, functional plasma reactors, weapons that utilize principles no longer understood. What they often find instead are the tomb complexes of a species whose technological achievements make even the greatest accomplishments of the dark age of technology seem primitive by comparison. The initial signs of a tomb world's presence are subtle. Survey equipment detects unusual mineral compositions or unexpected energy signatures deep beneath the surface. Ground-penetrating scans reveal vast hollow spaces where natural cavern formation would be impossible. Geologic assessments identify building materials that should not exist on worlds of a particular type. These anomalies excite the explorator teams, suggesting the presence of advanced civilizations and promising significant archaeological value. Authorization is granted for deeper investigation. Excavation begins. And with the first deep probe, or the first breach of an outer chamber, the tomb world's defensive protocols activate. In other cases, discovery comes not through deliberate exploration, but through the mundane requirements of colonization. An Imperial mining operation, seeking valuable minerals to feed the Imperium's endless hunger for raw materials, drives shafts deeper into a mountain range. The miners break through into a chamber of black stone and living metal, their drill bits passing through walls that were ancient when Earth's dinosaurs still roamed. Or a planetary governor seeking to expand a growing city approves a construction project that requires deep foundations. The pilings are driven down through sediment and bedrock until they pierce the outer shell of a tomb complex that has remained sealed for millions of years. In these scenarios, the people responsible for the discovery have no context for what they've found. They see strange alien architecture and unusual materials. They perhaps marvel at the craftsmanship or speculate about the civilization that built these structures. And then the canoptek scarabs emerge from the darkness and the screaming begins. A third, particularly insidious form of discovery occurs when tomb worlds awaken on their own initiative, following programming laid down millions of years ago. The tomb complexes operate according to chronostat protocols, internal timing mechanisms that were supposed to coordinate the awakening across multiple worlds. These chronostats were never perfect, and 60 million years of operation has introduced significant drift in their accuracy. Some tomb worlds awake far earlier than planned, their inhabitants emerging into a galaxy still roiling with conflict and inhabited by civilizations at the height of their power. Others sleep far longer than intended, their awakening delayed by malfunctions or damage until circumstances have significantly changed. And some never awaken at all, their chronostats having failed completely, leaving their inhabitants trapped in eternal stasis or degraded into non-functional remnants. Regardless of how the discovery occurs, the response from the tomb complex follows predictable patterns. The first stage involves the activation of the canoptek constructs, the autonomous machines that serve as the tomb's maintenance crews and initial defense force. These constructs have remained active throughout the Great Sleep, performing repairs and monitoring systems without pause. They are not true artificial intelligences in the way that term might be understood by the Adeptus Mechanicus, but rather sophisticated programs capable of adapting to circumstances within defined parameters. When sensors detect intrusion or damage to the tomb complex, the canoptek constructs shift from their maintenance protocols to defensive configurations. The canoptek scarabs typically respond first. These small beetle-like machines exist in vast swarms, numbering in the millions throughout even modest tomb complexes. Each individual scarab measures perhaps 30 centimeters in length, its silver carapace gleaming in the darkness as internal power sources activate. The scarabs possess the terrifying ability to consume almost any material, organic or inorganic, breaking it down at the molecular level and converting it into energy. A single scarab is a nuisance. A dozen can strip a human to bones in seconds. A swarm numbering in the thousands becomes an unstoppable tide of chittering death that can consume tanks, fortifications, and entire formations of soldiers. The sound of the scarabs is often the first indication that something has gone catastrophically wrong. Those who have survived encounters with awakening tomb worlds report hearing a high-pitched chittering, like billions of mandibles clicking against one another. The sound starts distant and grows steadily louder. Those who hear it have only moments to flee. The swarms burst from hidden passages and newly opened breaches in the tomb walls. They flow across surfaces like liquid metal, defying gravity as they skitter up walls and across ceilings. They fill corridors so completely that the air itself seems to turn silver with their presence. And anything caught in their path is simply consumed, reduced to component atoms and absorbed as fuel for the swarm's continued operation. Behind the scarab swarms come the canoptek spiders, massive arachnoid constructs that serve as overseers and coordinators for the tomb's defensive systems. Each spider stands perhaps 3 meters tall, its body a rounded carapace supported by multiple articulated legs. Anti-gravitic engines allow these constructs to move with surprising speed and agility, despite their bulk. The spiders direct the scarab swarms with machine efficiency, coordinating attacks and identifying threats based on assessment algorithms that have been refined over millions of years. More than simple combat units, the spiders also serve as mobile repair stations, capable of fabricating new scarabs as needed and performing emergency maintenance on tomb systems damaged during awakening. Watching a canoptek spider work is witnessing alien intelligence in action. These constructs demonstrate problem-solving capabilities that suggest something beyond mere programming. They adapt to changing circumstances, redirect resources based on tactical assessment, and coordinate with other spiders to create emergent behaviors greater than the sum of their individual actions. When 3 spiders operate in concert, one assumes overall command, linking its processing capacity with the others to form a gestalt intelligence. This collective mind can coordinate defensive operations across vast sections of a tomb complex, directing scarabs to plug breaches, while simultaneously engaging threats and maintaining critical systems. Intruders who believed they faced simple machines quickly discover their error when confronting spiders capable of this level of coordination. The canoptek wraiths add another dimension to the tomb's defensive capability. These constructs phase in and out of normal space, their dimensional displacement generators allowing them to pass through solid matter as if it did not exist. Wraiths hunt intruders with predatory efficiency, emerging from walls or floors to strike with whips of living metal before phasing back into immaterial states. They are nearly impossible to target with conventional weapons and can bypass any physical barrier. Survival against wraiths requires either weapons specifically designed to target phasing technology or the ability to predict where they will emerge and strike in the brief moment when they exist fully in real space. Most defenders possess neither capability. While the Canoptech constructs engage immediate threats, deeper systems within the tomb complex assess the situation and determine appropriate responses. This assessment is performed by what the Imperium calls the Tomb Mind, or Deep Spirit, a master control program that oversees all tomb operations during the Great Sleep. The Tomb Mind is not conscious in any meaningful sense, but rather represents an extremely sophisticated expert system, a program designed to handle contingencies and make decisions based on extensive parameters. It monitors thousands of data streams simultaneously, evaluating everything from structural integrity to power reserves to threat assessment. The Tomb Mind's responses follow programmed escalation protocols. Minor disturbances, such as natural seismic activity or small-scale intrusions, merit only basic defensive responses. Canoptech constructs are dispatched to address the issue while the rest of the tomb remains in stasis. But more significant threats trigger increasingly aggressive countermeasures. The Tomb Mind begins calculating the scale of forces necessary to eliminate the threat and initiates the awakening of appropriate military units. This is where the true horror begins. This is when the tomb world transforms from an archaeological curiosity into a fully operational military installation populated by an army of immortal robotic warriors. The awakening process itself unfolds in stages, each carefully orchestrated to minimize risk and maximize effectiveness. The lowest tiers of Necron society wake first. In the vast halls where millions of Necron warriors have slumbered, stasis fields begin to deactivate. The process is gradual, energy flowing back into dormant systems in carefully regulated pulses. Within each warrior, ancient circuitry comes back online. Optical sensors flicker to life. Motor functions initialize. And consciousness, that spark of awareness that has endured 60 million years of dreamless sleep, stirs and returns. The Necron warriors are the most basic units of their military hierarchy, the common soldiers who once formed the bulk of the Necron tier armies and who retained that role after biotransference. During their transformation, the warriors lost the most to the transfer process. Their personalities were largely erased, their memories reduced to fragmentary impressions. What remains are beings capable of following orders and executing tactical protocols, but possessing little individual initiative or self-awareness. They wake to find themselves in bodies they no longer fully understand, motivated by programming they cannot question, serving purposes they can barely remember. Yet for all that has been taken from them, the warriors remain fearsome combatants. They wake armed with Gauss flayers, the standard infantry weapons of the Necron legions, and they retain the tactical knowledge encoded into their engrams during the biotransference. As more warriors wake and form into their units, the tomb complex begins to resemble a military base coming to alert status. Formations assemble with mechanical precision. Equipment checks are performed through processes so automated, they occur below the level of conscious thought. Command hierarchies reassert themselves as squad leaders, and unit commanders wake and begin coordinating their forces. All of this happens with minimal communication, the warriors moving with the synchronized efficiency of a single organism, rather than an army of individuals. They flow through the tomb complex toward assigned positions, preparing to face whatever threats the tomb mind has identified. The next tier to wake consists of the Immortals, elite infantry who retained more of their personality and capability through the biotransference process. Where warriors are essentially programmable automatons, Immortals possess actual individual identity, and the capacity for independent thought. They wake with memories intact and purpose clear. An immortal remembers who they were before the Great Sleep. They remember campaigns fought and victories won. And they wake with the absolute certainty that their dynasty must be restored to glory regardless of the cost. The immortals arm themselves with Gauss blasters, more powerful variants of the warrior's weapons, and they assume command positions throughout the waking military forces. As the lower tiers complete their awakening, the tomb's noble houses begin to stir. This process moves more slowly, for the revivification of a Necron lord or overlord requires significantly more care than waking a warrior. The nobles retained the most of their original personalities during biotransference, including their ambitions, their vanities, and their often complex political machinations. They wake gradually, their consciousness expanding into their metallic bodies like a person emerging from a particularly deep sleep. Disorientation is common in these early moments. The nobles struggle to reconcile their memories of the old flesh with the reality of their new forms. They search through data looms to understand how much time has passed and what circumstances led to their awakening. The personality and priorities of the tomb world's ruling overlord, or pharaoh, defines everything that follows. Some nobles wake pragmatic and focused, immediately taking stock of their situation and beginning to plan their response. Others wake paranoid or erratic, their consciousness damaged by millions of years in stasis or by malfunctions in their restoration. Still others wake furious at having been disturbed, viewing the very existence of other species on what they consider their rightful territory as an insult that must be avenged. The variability in noble responses means that no two tomb worlds wake the same way. One might immediately seek to negotiate, willing to coexist with the current inhabitants if appropriate tribute is paid. Another might immediately order the total annihilation of all life on the planet's surface, viewing the younger species as vermin that must be exterminated before the true work of restoration can begin. Throughout this awakening process, the cryptechs serve as specialists and advisors to the noble houses. These are Necrons who retained their scientific knowledge and technical expertise through biotransference, the engineers and theorists who understood the mechanisms underlying their civilization's greatest achievements. Cryptechs wake with their knowledge intact and immediately begin assessing the tomb systems. They evaluate power reserves and structural integrity. They analyze the threat profiles uploaded by the canoptech constructs. They calculate the most efficient responses to the current situation. Some cryptechs specialize in specific domains. Chronomancers manipulate time itself, speeding allies or slowing enemies. Plasmancers wield solar energies as weapons. Psychomancers project madness and terror into the minds of their foes. Each brings unique capabilities to the waking dynasty's arsenal. The Necron military doctrine for dealing with awakening threats follows a principle of measured escalation. Initial responses deploy only as much force as the tomb mind calculates necessary to eliminate the immediate danger. If a handful of explorers have breached the outer chambers, then perhaps only warriors and canoptech constructs respond. These forces eliminate the intruders and seal the breach, then return to their positions, while the tomb mind evaluates whether further awakening is warranted. This approach conserves power and minimizes the risk of complications arising from premature awakening of the entire tomb complex. It also means that early encounters with Necron forces often significantly underestimate the true scale of the threat, as the defenders see only a tiny fraction of the armies sleeping beneath their feet. However, if the threat proves more significant, or if it persists despite initial responses, the escalation continues. More warriors wake, immortals deploy in greater numbers, specialist units activate. Destroyers, Necrons, whose hatred of living things has driven them to modify their bodies into hovering weapon platforms, emerge from their crypts, seeking targets. Lichguard, the noble house's elite bodyguards, activate and take positions defending their masters. Triarch Praetorians, warriors dedicated to maintaining the ancient codes of Necron civilization, wake to serve as enforcers and exemplars. And at the highest levels of escalation, the tomb's war machines come online. Monoliths, massive flying pyramids bristling with devastating weapons, phase into reality. Ghost arcs and night scythes, transport vehicles capable of delivering entire formations across vast distances, activate their engines, and at the absolute extreme, in situations where survival of the dynasty itself is at stake, the tomb might even awaken its imprisoned Citan shards, fragments of the star gods bound within tesseract labyrinths and pressed into service as weapons of last resort. This escalation doctrine means that any military force engaging a waking tomb world must understand that what they face initially represents only the beginning of the threat. Every victory, every enemy unit destroyed, every defensive position overrun, all of it merely triggers the next level of response. Destroy 100 warriors, and 1,000 more wake to replace them. Eliminate those, and the immortals deploy. Push deeper into the tomb and face the Lich Guard defending the noble crypts. And at every stage, the defenders must contend with the fact that destroyed Necrons do not always stay destroyed. The living metal of their bodies includes sophisticated self-repair protocols that can restore even catastrophically damaged warriors. A Necron blown apart by heavy weapons might phase back to the tomb complex, where Canoptech constructs, gather the fragments, and begin repairs. Within hours or days, that same warrior can return to battle, its consciousness restored to a fresh or repaired body, ready to fight again. The weapons the Necrons bring to bear against their enemies showcase technology that remains completely beyond the understanding of any other galactic civilization. The most common Necron weapon, carried by every Necron warrior, is the Gauss Flare. To call it a rifle or energy weapon fails to capture the alien horror of what these devices actually do. A Gauss Flare does not fire bullets or laser beams. Instead, it projects a focused electromagnetic field that disrupts the molecular bonds holding matter together. When this field contacts a target, organic or inorganic, that target begins to disintegrate at a molecular level. Skin flays away from muscle. Muscle strips from bone. Bone itself crumbles to dust. And all of this happens in an instant, accompanied by the characteristic green lightning that surrounds the disintegration effect. The truly horrifying aspect of Gauss weapons lies in their complete effectiveness, regardless of protection. Armor provides no defense because the weapons do not need to penetrate it. They simply strip it away, layer by layer, molecule by molecule, until they reach the flesh beneath and continue the dissolution. Force fields fail because the effect operates at scales too small for most field generators to disrupt. Even the thick armor plating of Imperial tanks offers only momentary resistance before the Gauss beams eat through it and reach the vulnerable crew and equipment inside. Reports from survivors of Necron attacks describe watching their comrades literally flayed alive by the green lightning, reduced from living beings to skeletons to dust in the span of seconds. The psychological impact of witnessing such deaths devastates morale faster than almost any other weapon effect. The technological principles underlying Gauss weapons confound every attempt at analysis or replication by the Adeptus Mechanicus. The weapons appear to generate electromagnetic fields measuring in the multi-megawatt range from power sources no larger than a standard lace gun power pack. By all known principles of physics, the weapons should overheat catastrophically with each shot, melting themselves and their users. The trigger mechanisms should weld shut from the energy discharge. The focusing systems should degrade under the intense forces involved. None of this happens. The weapons fire with perfect reliability through millions of shots. They never overheat. They never jam. The living metal of their construction seems immune to wear and degradation. Tech priests who have captured intact Gauss flares for study report that examination only deepens the mystery. The internal mechanisms are impossibly precise, manufactured to tolerances measuring in the atomic scale. Even microscopic irregularities that exist in the finest Imperial craftsmanship are absent in Necron weapons. And perhaps most frustratingly, any attempt to disassemble a Gauss flare for detailed analysis results in the weapon's internal systems degrading rapidly, as if the devices possess some form of anti-tampering protocol that renders them useless once removed from Necron control. Gauss weapons come in numerous varieties beyond the basic flare. Gauss blasters, wielded by immortals, fire more powerful beams capable of greater sustained damage. Gauss cannons mounted on destroyers combine multiple barrels to deliver devastating rates of fire. Heavy Gauss cannons serve as anti-vehicle weapons comparable to Imperial lascannons in power, but superior in reliability and rate of fire. And at the largest scales, Gauss flux arcs and particle whips mounted on monoliths can sweep entire battlefields clear of enemies, their beams wide enough to engulf tanks and powerful enough to reduce them to molecular vapor. The sheer variety of Gauss weaponry available to the Necrons, combined with its universal effectiveness, regardless of target type, makes any military force facing them struggle with the problem of how to effectively engage an enemy whose basic infantry can threaten heavy armor, while their specialized anti-armor units can eliminate entire formations with single salvos. The living metal that comprises Necron bodies and equipment represents another aspect of their technological supremacy that defies Imperial understanding. This material, called necrodermis, possesses properties that violate numerous fundamental principles of materials science. It demonstrates strength comparable to adamantium while remaining lighter than standard ceramite. It conducts electricity with zero resistance while simultaneously serving as perfect thermal insulation when required. Most remarkably, it can self-repair, reorganizing at the molecular level to restore damage automatically. A Necron warrior whose arm is severed can watch as the living metal flows like liquid to reconnect the limb, restoring full function within moments. Even catastrophic damage can be repaired given sufficient time and resources, with the metal literally rebuilding the Necron's body from fragments. This self-repair capability means that tactical victories against Necron forces rarely translate into strategic advantage. An Imperial Guard commander might successfully repel a Necron attack, destroying dozens or even hundreds of enemy warriors. But unless those destroyed Necrons are so completely obliterated that no recoverable fragments remain, the tombs Canoptek constructs will gather the remains and begin restoration. Within days or weeks, those same warriors can return to battle, fully functional and ready to try again. The only reliable ways to permanently remove Necrons from the battlefield are complete molecular disintegration, capture and transport away from the tomb complex, or pushing them into environments where recovery becomes impossible. Each of these approaches presents significant challenges. Complete disintegration requires weapons of immense power applied with precision. Capture demands specialized equipment to contain and transport living metal that actively works to escape. And environmental destruction on scales necessary to deny Necrons recovery options typically means rendering entire regions uninhabitable. When an Imperial world discovers it sits atop a Necron tomb world, the responses vary wildly depending on who makes the discovery and what resources they have available. In the best-case scenario, the discovery comes early enough that evacuation remains possible and military forces can be deployed before the tomb fully awakens. However, this ideal situation rarely occurs. More commonly, the discovery comes too late, with substantial awakening already underway and defensive options severely limited. The Adeptus Mechanicus, when they discover a tomb world, face a complex set of competing priorities. Their standing orders emphasize the recovery of archaeotech and the study of alien technology that might advance mankind's understanding. A Necron tomb represents the ultimate prize in this regard, a treasure trove of working examples of technology that makes even the legendary STC systems seem primitive. Yet the tech priests also recognize the extreme danger these installations represent. Official Mechanicus protocols call for immediate notification of any Necron discovery to higher authorities, while simultaneously deploying containment forces to prevent further awakening. In practice, these protocols are often ignored or delayed. Ambitious Magos commanders convince themselves they can contain the situation while extracting valuable samples. They believe their understanding of technology gives them insight into Necron systems. They think they can predict and control the awakening process. They are almost always wrong. The Mechanicus facilities orbiting Imperium in the 42nd Millennium serve as a cautionary example. Imperium functioned openly as an imperial burial world, a place where honored dead from across the Imperium were laid to rest. But beneath the surface burials, tech priests discovered layers of far older tombs. Ancient Necron-tier architecture revealed itself in deep excavations. Rather than reporting this discovery immediately and evacuating the planet, the Mechanicus established research facilities to study the xenotech. They convinced themselves the Necrons here remained safely dormant. They believed their examination protocols would avoid triggering any defensive responses. When Magos Ekaterina Malvolos discovered code fragments in the tomb systems and followed them deeper into the installation, she triggered awakening protocols that had waited 60 million years. The tomb stalkers that emerged killed her and began systematically hunting every human on the planet. The Imperial Guard faces even grimmer prospects when defending against awakening tomb worlds. Guardsmen represent the Imperium's standard military response to most threats. Capable soldiers equipped with reliable, if unremarkable, weapons and supported by armored vehicles and artillery. Against most enemies, these forces prove adequate. Against Necrons, they face a scenario where every assumption about warfare breaks down. The enemy cannot be suppressed by weight of fire. They cannot be pinned or forced to retreat through morale shock. They cannot be starved of resources or cut off from resupply because they require neither food nor ammunition in conventional senses. And they certainly cannot be defeated through attrition when destroyed enemies simply repair themselves and return to battle. The defense of Amara during the Orphean War demonstrates the horrific cost of engaging awakening tomb worlds with conventional forces. When the Maynarch dynasty began emerging from their tombs on Amara Prime, the planet's Imperial Guard garrison responded with standard defensive doctrine. They established kill zones and firing lines. They deployed heavy weapons to target concentrations of enemy forces. They called for artillery support and orbital bombardment. All of it proved insufficient. The Necron forces simply advanced through the defensive fire, their living metal bodies absorbing damage that would have obliterated normal infantry. When the bombardment intensified, the Necrons redirected their own weapons skyward, shooting down incoming ordnance before it could reach its targets. And when the Guard managed to destroy significant numbers of Necrons through focused fire, the tomb complexes simply woke more warriors to replace them. The death corps of Krieg, renowned for their willingness to accept massive casualties in pursuit of victory, were deployed to Amara in a neo-Sing attempt to overwhelm the Necron forces through sheer weight of numbers. The Kriegers advanced in human waves, accepting horrific losses to close with the enemy. They fought with bayonets and entrenching tools when their weapons proved insufficient. They literally clambered over piles of their own dead to reach the tomb complexes. In scenes that would haunt the survivors, the Kriegers charged across open ground while Gauss beams flayed entire platoons into dust. They pressed forward while Canoptech scarabs swarmed over them, stripping flesh from bone. They maintained formation as tombstalkers burst from the ground beneath them, tearing through their lines with impossible speed and violence. The Kriegers' legendary discipline held, but even that iron will could not overcome the fundamental imbalance of the engagement. For every Necron warrior destroyed, 3 Kriegsmen died, and the Kriegsmen stayed dead while the Necrons repaired themselves and returned. Space Marines, the Imperium's elite soldiers, and perhaps the only military force with technology approaching the capability needed to fight Necrons on even terms, still find themselves challenged by awakening tomb worlds. The Adeptus Astartes brings to battle advantages that few other Imperial forces possess. Their power armor provides actual protection against Gauss weapons, not indefinite resistance, but enough to survive hits that would instantly kill normal soldiers. Their bolters, firing mass reactive ammunition, can generate enough damage to overwhelm Necron repair protocols if applied with precision. And their tactical flexibility, combined with abilities to deploy rapidly through drop pods or Thunderhawk gunships, allows them to strike at specific targets rather than engaging in the grinding battles of attrition that doom Imperial Guard forces. Yet even with these advantages, Space Marines must approach Necron tomb worlds with extreme caution and careful planning. Chapter after chapter has learned through bitter experience that initial estimates of Necron strength are always wrong. The first wave of defenders represents only a fraction of the forces available. Each tactical victory triggers the awakening of more powerful units, and the Necron's ability to phase out to safety and repair before returning means that killed enemies cannot be reliably counted as permanently removed from the battle. Space Marine doctrine against tomb worlds emphasizes rapid strikes against specific objectives, typically targeting the tomb's power generation systems or attempting to eliminate noble commanders before they can coordinate a full defensive response. When such strikes succeed, they can sometimes allow the Necrons to be driven back into dormancy without requiring the destruction of the entire tomb complex. But when they fail, the consequences can be catastrophic. The political and military structures of the Necrons themselves, the dynasties that rule their civilization, add another layer of complexity to any engagement with tomb worlds. The Necrons are not a unified empire operating under a single command structure. Instead, they are divided into numerous dynasties, each ruled by its own noble house, and each pursuing its own agenda. While the Silent King holds theoretical authority as the supreme ruler of all Necron kind, his long absence and the independent nature of the dynasties means that in practice, each tomb world operates with significant autonomy. This fragmentation means that policies and behaviors can vary wildly between different Necron encounters. One dynasty might prove willing to negotiate, even to coexist with younger species if appropriate conditions are met. Another might pursue genocidal policies, viewing the very existence of organic life as an affront that must be corrected. The Sautek dynasty, currently the largest and most militarily powerful of the Necron dynasties, follows aggressive expansionist policies under the leadership of Pharaon Imhotep the Stormlord. The Sautek have awakened with much of their strength intact and immediately began military campaigns to reclaim their former territories and expand their influence. Imhotep himself is considered one of the finest military minds in the galaxy, a strategic genius capable of coordinating forces across multiple sectors and anticipating enemy responses with uncanny accuracy. His forces excel at medium-range firefights, using their rapid-fire Gauss weapons to systematically obliterate enemy formations before they can close to melee or pull back beyond effective range. When a tomb world reveals itself as Sautek, defenders can expect to face methodical, well-coordinated assaults that exploit every tactical weakness and respond adaptively to changing battlefield conditions. The Mefrit dynasty, once employed by the Silent Kings as executioners and specialists in close-range devastation, awakens with a singular focus on annihilation. Mefrit forces excel in short-range firefights, where their enhanced Gauss weapons achieve maximum armor penetration. They favor aggressive tactics, closing rapidly with their enemies to unleash withering firepower at ranges where even heavy armor provides no protection. The Mefrit are particularly dangerous to armored formations, as their weapons can tear through even super heavy tanks when applied at close range. Defenders facing Mefrit tomb worlds must balance the need to engage at longer ranges, where Mefrit firepower is less overwhelming, against the Necron's ability to advance through defensive fire that would stop other forces. The Nihilak dynasty pursues a defensive strategy focused on holding their crown world and core territories, rather than aggressive expansion. When a Nihilak tomb awakens on a world the dynasty considers rightfully theirs, they dig in with incredible tenacity. Nihilak forces deploy extensive defensive positions and coordinate their defenses with precision that makes dislodging them nearly impossible. They hold objectives with supernatural determination, their troops literally refusing to be driven back regardless of casualties or tactical situation. Yet this defensive focus also means that Nihilak tomb worlds can sometimes be negotiated with. If their core territories remain undisturbed, they may tolerate the presence of other species on the periphery. But any attempt to claim land the Nihilak consider theirs triggers absolute and uncompromising military response. The Novok dynasty represents an aberration among Necrons, a warrior culture that emphasizes melee combat despite their species' general preference for ranged warfare. The Novok are bloodthirsty by Necron standards, pursuing close combat with an enthusiasm that approaches actual emotion. When Novok forces awaken, they advance with singular focus toward enemy lines, seeking to engage in hand-to-hand combat where their specialized melee weapons can carve through opponents. Defenders facing Novok tomb worlds find themselves in the unusual position of fighting Necrons, who charge into close quarters rather than maintaining distance and relying on ranged firepower. This aggressive melee focus makes Novok forces particularly devastating against less mobile opponents, but also creates opportunities for defenders who can effectively employ mobile warfare and fighting withdrawal tactics. The Zarakan dynasty holds special significance as the dynasty of the Silent King himself. With the Silent King's return to the galaxy in the current age, the Zarakan have experienced a dramatic resurgence in power and prestige. Other dynasties that once operated with complete independence now find themselves pressured to acknowledge the Silent King's authority. The Zarakan themselves pursue the most sophisticated strategy among the Necrons, viewing the younger species not merely as enemies to be destroyed, but as potential resources or tools to be manipulated toward the Silent King's greater purposes. Zarakan tomb worlds often employ complex strategic approaches that include temporary alliances, manipulation of other factions, and long-term planning that spans centuries. They are perhaps the most dangerous dynasty to face, not because of their immediate military power, but because of their willingness to employ any tactic, including apparently cooperative behavior, in pursuit of their ultimate goals. Specific tomb worlds that have been discovered and partially documented provide glimpses into the scale and variety of the threat. Solemnes, a tomb world transformed by its ruler, Trazyn the Infinite, into a vast museum, contains countless treasures from across galactic history. Trazyn collects artifacts and specimens, including living beings placed in stasis fields, preserving them perfectly for his private galleries. When Inquisitor Helena Valeria led an investigation to Solemnes, seeking to understand why the planet had survived a Tyranid incursion that consumed all others in its path, she discovered endless halls filled with historical exhibits. The tomb world itself exists more as a museum than a military installation, though its defensive capabilities proved more than sufficient to annihilate Valeria's expedition when they disturbed Trazyn's collection. Demarium, as mentioned previously, represents the horror of hidden tomb worlds existing beneath seemingly ordinary Imperial installations. For thousands of years, Demarium functioned as a burial world, without anyone realizing a massive Necron tomb complex lay beneath the Imperial interments. Multiple layers of tombs existed, with ancient Necron-tire architecture sandwiched between Imperial burials above and vast Necron installations below. Only when Chaos forces attacked the world and tech priests began deeper investigations did the true nature of Demarium reveal itself. The awakening Tombstalkers and other defensive constructs killed researchers and began the process of reclaiming the world, demonstrating how even long-settled Imperial planets can transform overnight into deadly Necron territories. Ignaris, a frontier world in the Segmentum Ultima, experienced a sudden and catastrophic awakening when its Necron inhabitants stirred without warning. settlements began vanishing overnight, their populations simply disappearing without trace. When refugees fled to the planetary capital and riots broke out at the spaceport, Necron warriors rose from the sea itself, led by a blazing Satan shard. The assault would have killed everyone on the planet if not for the intervention of a lone Imperial knight who managed to drive the Necrons back and banish their god fragment. But this proved only a temporary reprieve. Later in the 41st Millennium, the Necrons returned in overwhelming force and reclaimed Ignaris, sweeping away the human settlements and establishing the world as a staging ground for further expansion toward the Gothic sector. The full awakening of a tomb world, when a dynasty emerges at its complete strength, represents one of the most catastrophic events that can occur in any region of space. What begins as isolated attacks and mysterious disappearances escalates into full-scale warfare as the tomb brings more and more of its military might to bear. Tomb citadels rise from the ground, massive fortifications that can deploy directly into battlefields and serve as beachheads for Necron forces. Monoliths phase into reality by the dozens, their particle whips sweeping across defending positions. Whole fleets of Necron vessels emerge from dimensional storage, their crescent-shaped hulls displacing the very space they occupy as they transition from wherever the tomb complex stored them. And at the highest levels of response, the dynasty's war engines deploy. Massive constructs like obelisks and tesseract vaults that can devastate entire armies through firepower alone. The Imperium has developed specific response protocols for dealing with tomb world discoveries, though the implementation of these protocols varies wildly depending on circumstances. Official doctrine calls for immediate notification of any suspected Necron presence to the highest levels of command, typically meaning Segmentum Command or even Terra itself. The Ordo Xenos of the Inquisition maintains specialists focused specifically on the Necron threat. Individuals who have studied the fragmentary records of previous encounters and developed theoretical frameworks for understanding and combating them. When these specialists arrive, they assess the situation and recommend appropriate responses. In cases where the tomb world has barely begun awakening and its forces remain minimal, surgical strike operations may be authorized. Elite forces, typically including Space Marines and specialized inquisitorial assets, deploy to the tomb complex with the mission of destroying specific critical systems. If they can eliminate the tomb's power generation infrastructure or assassinate the commanding overlord before full awakening occurs, the defensive response may collapse, allowing the tomb to be more thoroughly destroyed, or at least contained. These missions carry extreme risk, requiring operatives to penetrate deep into alien installations filled with automated defenses and increasingly aware Necron forces. Success rates are low, but when successful, such operations can save entire sectors from the decades of warfare that fully awakened tomb worlds represent. When surgical strikes prove impossible or fail, the Imperium's response escalates to planetary-scale military operations. Imperial Guard armies deploy by the millions. Space Marine chapters commit their forces. The Imperial Navy establishes orbital superiority and begins sustained bombardment of suspected tomb complex locations. These campaigns can last years or even decades, grinding conflicts where every kilometer of advance costs thousands of lives. The Necrons hold every advantage in such engagements. They know the terrain intimately. They can repair damaged forces. They can deploy additional units from depths the attackers can only guess at, and they cannot be demoralized or forced to surrender. Victory for Imperial forces requires either completely destroying the tomb complex, a task that may require rendering the entire planet uninhabitable, or killing enough Necrons so quickly that their repair systems become overwhelmed. Neither objective is easily achieved. In the worst cases, when a tomb world awakens too rapidly or with too much strength for conventional military operations to contain it, the Imperium resorts to exterminatus. This extreme sanction authorizes the complete destruction of the entire world, typically through sustained orbital bombardment that either shatters the planet or renders its surface completely lifeless. Cyclonic torpedoes, virus bombs, atmospheric incinerators, all the terrible weapons of planetary destruction come into play. Yet even Exterminatus does not guarantee success against tomb worlds. The deepest levels of tomb complexes extend kilometers below the surface, protected by exotic shielding and dimensional displacement fields that can survive even planetary destruction. Some tomb worlds have been subjected to Exterminatus, only to continue functioning beneath the shattered surface, their Necron inhabitants simply waiting for the bombardment to cease before resuming their awakening. Truly eliminating a tomb world requires either complete planetary destruction, down to and including the core, or sustained presence to prevent the Necrons from rebuilding after each setback. The strategic implications of the Necron awakening extend far beyond individual planets or even sectors. Across the galaxy, more tomb worlds stir with each passing year. The Silent King's return has accelerated awakening for some dynasties, while others wake according to their own ancient chronostats. Imperial savants who understand the true scale of the threat calculate that for every tomb world currently known and engaged, dozens or hundreds more remain undiscovered. How many human worlds exist atop Necron tombs? How many minds have been driven to within meters of tomb complex walls? How many cities have foundations resting on ancient Necrontier architecture? The answers to these questions determine whether the Imperium faces a manageable series of localized threats or an existential crisis that could shatter humanity's galactic empire. Some scholars within the Ordo Xenos have attempted to estimate total Necron numbers based on fragmentary evidence and theoretical modeling. Their calculations paint a terrifying picture. If even a fraction of the tomb worlds they suspect exist actually do contain sleeping Necrons, if even a small percentage of those tombs wake with their forces intact, then the total military strength of the Necrons could exceed that of every other major galactic power combined. The Necrons, at the height of their power, ruled the entire galaxy. Their empire dwarfed anything that has existed since. If they manage to restore even a fraction of that ancient glory, if they can coordinate their forces across multiple dynasties and pursue a unified strategy, then no other species may possess the strength to resist them. Yet the Necrons face significant obstacles to achieving such dominance. The 60 million years of the Great Sleep did not pass without cost. Many tomb worlds suffered catastrophic failures, their inhabitants lost forever or reduced to mindless automatons. Others awoke to discover their noble houses fragmented by malfunctions, their command hierarchies broken beyond repair. The dynasties compete with one another as much as they war against younger species, ancient rivalries, and territorial disputes, preventing the unified action that might make them truly unstoppable. And perhaps most significantly, the Necrons themselves struggle with the fundamental tragedy of their existence. They achieved immortality, but lost their souls in the process. They can remember what they once were, but can never return to that state. Some of them, particularly among the nobility, retain enough self-awareness to recognize the horror of what they have become. These individuals may pursue goals beyond simple conquest, seeking meaning or purpose in an existence that stretches toward eternity without ever offering release. The Silent King himself, according to fragmentary accounts, has expressed what might be interpreted as regret over the biotransference. He destroyed the command protocols that bound the Necrons to absolute obedience before departing on his long exile through the intergalactic void. Some interpret this action as an attempt to give his species back their free will, to allow them some measure of choice in the endless ages they would endure. Whether the Silent King seeks to undo the biotransference, to somehow restore the Necrons to organic form, remains unknown. But if such an agenda drives him, it adds a dimension to Necron strategy that goes beyond simple military conquest. It suggests that at least some Necrons might pursue goals that could involve cooperation with younger species rather than their elimination. For the Imperium of man, for the Eldari craft worlds and Drukhari cabals, for the Orc empires and Tau enclaves. The awakening of the Necron tomb worlds represents a threat that cannot be ignored, but may prove impossible to fully counter. Every excavation might trigger an awakening. Every mining operation risks breaching tomb complex walls. Every colony established on what seems like a lifeless world might be placing human populations directly above legions of sleeping killers. The Imperium fights constant wars on 1,000 fronts, barely holding back the tide of Xenos invasions, heretic uprisings, and demonic incursions. Adding a foe as powerful and implacable as the Necrons to that list of threats may prove to be the final straw that breaks humanity's desperate hold on the galaxy. Yet even in the face of this horror, resistance continues. Imperial Guard soldiers hold their positions even as Gauss beams flay their comrades. Space Marines charge into tomb complexes despite knowing the odds of survival hover near zero. Inquisitors pursue leads and gather intelligence, building understanding one painful lesson at a time. The Imperium survives not through any inherent strength or technological supremacy, but through the sheer stubborn refusal of its people to surrender. They die in their billions, but always there are more to take up the fight. They lose worlds and sectors, but always they rebuild and come back for another round. This persistence may prove humanity's greatest weapon. The Necrons can repair their bodies, but they remain finite in number. Every Necron permanently destroyed is one that cannot be replaced. And while the repair systems work miracles, even they have limits. Overwhelming them, destroying Necrons faster than they can be, restored, represents one of the few paths to victory that do not require either technological parity or exterminatus. The Xenos factions face similar challenges when dealing with Necron tomb worlds. The Eldari, ancient enemies of the Necrons from the War in Heaven, possess more knowledge of the threat than humanity does. Craft worlds like Alitok have made the destruction of tomb worlds a priority, sending their forces deep into Necron territories to sabotage awakening installations and assassinate rising overlords. The Eldari recognize that a fully awakened Necron empire represents an existential threat to their species. They have seen what the Necrons can do, fought against them during the ancient wars, and know that no mercy can be expected from warriors who have transcended death itself. Yet even with their advanced technology and detailed knowledge, the Eldari struggle against tomb worlds. Their numbers are too few to engage in sustained warfare, forcing them to rely on hit-and-run tactics and strategic strikes rather than direct confrontation. The Tau Empire, newest of the galaxy's major powers, approaches the Necron threat with characteristic confidence, born of ignorance. Tau forces encountering Necrons for the first time deploy standard doctrine, attempting to engage at range where their superior firepower can be brought to bear. This approach sometimes works in limited engagements, particularly against minimally awakened tomb worlds. But the Tau lack the experience to recognize when they face only a fraction of a tomb's strength. They win battles and claim victory, not realizing they have merely scratched the surface of the enemy's true capability. When tomb worlds escalate their responses and bring their full strength to bear, Tau forces find themselves overwhelmed by enemies they thought defeated. The Tau's rapid expansion has brought them into contact with multiple Necron tomb worlds, and their learning curve is being written in the casualties suffered by their firecast warriors. The Orcs represent perhaps the strangest case in terms of engagement with Necron tomb worlds. Orcs love a good fight above all else, and the Necrons provide exactly that. The Greenskins care little about the exotic nature of Necron technology or the tactical implications of facing self-repairing enemies. They see targets that fight back effectively, which is all they require for satisfaction. Orc wars have clashed with awakening tomb worlds across the galaxy, and while the Necrons typically possess overwhelming technological advantages, the Orcs' sheer numbers and aggressive enthusiasm can sometimes achieve what more sophisticated strategies cannot. An Orc army will charge directly into Gauss fire without hesitation, accepting casualties that would break any other force, and continue fighting until either all the Necrons are destroyed or all the Orcs are dead. Given sufficient numbers, the Orcs can sometimes achieve the critical mass of damage needed to overwhelm Necron repair protocols through simple attrition. For individual worlds discovering themselves atop Necron tomb complexes, the experience plays out as a slow-motion apocalypse. The first signs appear subtle and easily dismissed. Workers in mines report finding chambers of unusual architecture. Archaeologists studying ancient ruins discover artifacts that do not match any known culture. Seismic sensors detect movement deep underground, where no geological activity should occur. These warnings are typically ignored or rationalized away until the situation escalates beyond containment. By the time authorities recognize the true nature of the threat, Canoptech constructs have already been active for days or weeks. Disappearances begin. Entire work crews vanish in remote locations. Isolated settlements go silent. Investigation teams fail to return from their assignments. Then the attacks become overt. Necron warriors emerge from newly opened tomb complex entrances, their Gauss weapons cutting down defenders with mechanical precision. Population centers come under assault. Defensive forces deploy only to discover that conventional weapons prove largely ineffective. Planetary governments call for help, but by the time aid can arrive from off-world, the situation has typically deteriorated catastrophically. The tomb world's forces control significant territory. Supply lines are cut. Communication becomes sporadic, and the defenders find themselves fighting a defensive war where every loss is permanent, while the enemy simply repairs and returns. Evacuation becomes the only rational response once a tomb world reaches full awakening, but executing an evacuation in the face of Necron assault presents nearly insurmountable challenges. The tomb complex will have awakened its forces in response to perceived threats, meaning defensive systems will be active and hostile to any activity. Spaceports come under attack by Necron aircraft and teleporting assault forces. Evacuation ships attempting to land find themselves targeted by anti-orbital weaponry that the tomb complex has deployed. And even if ships manage to collect refugees, the question becomes where to take them. Nearby systems may refuse to accept populations from a Necron-compromised world, fearing contamination, or that the evacuees themselves might trigger additional awakenings. In many cases, worlds caught in this situation face complete abandonment. The populations still surviving when help arrives are extracted if possible, but significant portions of the planetary population die before evacuation can be completed. The world itself is often subjected to sustained orbital bombardment in an attempt to cripple the tomb complex, then quarantined. Navigation warnings are issued, the system is marked as hostile territory, and the Necrons, having successfully driven the usurpers from what they consider their rightful territory, may return to dormancy once the immediate threats are eliminated. Or they may continue awakening, transforming the world into a forward operating base for further expansion. The uncertainty makes every compromised world a potential crisis, a situation that must be monitored constantly lest it explode into a regional threat. The individual human experience of living on a world during a tomb world awakening is pure nightmare. Imagine waking one morning to news reports of strange attacks in remote regions. Mining facilities have gone silent. Investigation teams have disappeared. The government issues reassurances while quietly mobilizing defensive forces. Days pass. The attacks continue, growing closer to population centers. You see images on news broadcasts of strange skeletal figures wielding weapons that strip people down to nothing with beams of green lightning. Officials begin discussing evacuation procedures, but there aren't enough ships, and no one knows if evacuation will even be possible. The attacks reach your city. You hear the chittering of Canoptech scarabs echoing through streets. You see the green light of Gauss weapons flaring in the darkness. And you realize that the world you've lived on your entire life, the place you thought safe and permanent, is being reclaimed by owners you never knew existed. Your fate, and that of everyone around you, depends entirely on whether help arrives before the Necrons complete their systematic elimination of all life they consider invasive to their territory. Some individuals caught in these situations attempt to negotiate or communicate with the Necrons. These attempts almost universally fail. The Necrons do not view humans or other younger species as beings worthy of communication. At best, the younger species are seen as trespassers who must be removed. At worst, they are viewed as vermin, infestations that must be cleansed before proper restoration of the dynasty can begin. Only in the rarest circumstances, when dealing with Necron nobles who retain significant portions of their original personality and possess specific reasons for seeking cooperation, do negotiations become possible. And even then, the terms offered by Necrons reflect their fundamental understanding that they hold all the advantages. Cooperation means absolute submission, recognition of Necron territorial claims, and acceptance of tributary status. Few human authorities can accept such terms, which means violence remains the only language spoken between the species. The long-term implications of the Necron awakening extend beyond immediate military concerns into existential questions about the galaxy's future. If the Necrons continue waking at current rates, if more tomb worlds come online each year, then at some point, the younger species will face a united front of enemies whose technological and numerical superiority becomes insurmountable. The Necrons have already demonstrated willingness and capability to pursue what Imperial savants call the harvest, systematic extermination of organic life from worlds they consider theirs. If this program extends to galactic scales, if the Necrons decide that the younger species represent threats to be eliminated rather than nuisances to be tolerated, then the Great Sleep will have been merely a reprieve before the final war of extinction. Yet countervailing factors suggest the situation may not be completely hopeless. The Necrons themselves remain divided by internal politics and ancient grudges. Not all dynasties pursue the same goals. Some seek simple survival and preservation of their territories rather than expansion. Others focus on recovering lost artifacts or pursuing vendettas against ancient enemies. These internal divisions prevent the unified action that would make Necrons truly unstoppable. Additionally, the technical challenges of fully restoring their empire remain significant. Many tomb worlds have suffered irreparable damage. Resources that the Necron tier took for granted are now depleted or controlled by younger species. And the galaxy itself has changed in ways that make simple restoration of the old empire impossible. The involvement of the Catan shards adds another layer of unpredictability to the situation. The fragments of star gods imprisoned by the Necrons retain immense power despite their diminished state. Some dynasties employ these shards as weapons, unleashing them against enemies while maintaining strict control through tesseract labyrinths. But the Catan remain fundamentally hostile to their Necron captors, and the possibility of an imprisoned shard breaking free and turning on its masters creates risk for any dynasty that relies too heavily on them. A Catan shard at full power could devastate entire systems, consuming stars themselves to feed its endless hunger. The younger species might find unlikely allies in Necrons who recognize that allowing Catan freedom threatens everyone regardless of species. For those facing the discovery of a Necron tomb world, several principles have emerged from hard-won experience. First, early detection is critical. The longer a tomb remains undisturbed after initial awakening begins, the more forces it can bring online. Every day of delay allows more warriors to wake, more systems to activate, more responses to be prepared. Rapid response, even with limited forces, can sometimes interrupt the awakening process at a vulnerable stage. Second, target selection matters immensely. Destroying random Necron warriors accomplishes little when those warriors can be repaired. But eliminating power infrastructure, assassinating commanding nobles, or sabotaging resurrection protocols can have cascading effects that cripple entire tomb complexes. Third, complete commitment is necessary. Half measures against tomb worlds simply waste resources and lives while allowing the Necrons to escalate their response. Either commit sufficient forces to achieve objectives or evacuate and plan more carefully for a later attempt. The final word on discovering Necron tomb worlds comes down to this. There is no such thing as a safe dead world in the galaxy of the 41st millennium. That barren desert planet where your expedition plans to search for archaeotech might contain tomb complexes kilometers beneath the sand. The asteroid your mining company wants to exploit might be a Necron installation disguised by millions of years of accumulated debris. The ancient ruins that seem so promising for archaeological study might be the surface structures of a civilization that never truly died, but merely slept. Every expedition into unknown territories carries the risk of disturbing something that should have remained undisturbed. Every mining operation might drive too deep. Every construction project might breach walls that were ancient when humanity still lived in caves. And when that discovery comes, when the first scarab swarm emerges from the darkness, or the first Gauss beam flares in the night, there is no room for denial or delay. The ancient kings of the galaxy are waking. They remember their empire, they remember their glory, and they fully intend to reclaim what they believe is rightfully theirs. The younger species can resist, they can fight, they can sometimes win individual battles or even campaign-scale conflicts. But the fundamental reality remains unchanged. The Necrons are awakening. More tomb worlds stir each day, and eventually, unless some unforeseen development changes the equation, they may achieve the restoration they seek. The galaxy they will rule will be one scoured clean of organic life, a sterile empire of immortal machines, presiding over dead worlds under dying stars. This is what happens when you discover a Necron tomb world. This is the price of curiosity, the cost of expansion, the consequence of building civilizations atop the graves of gods. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is no safety. There are only threats not yet encountered and enemies not yet awakened. And beneath countless worlds across the galaxy, in tombs that span continents, behind seals that have held for 60 million years, the Necrons wait. Not dead, never truly dead, only sleeping. And with each passing year, more of them wake to discover a galaxy ripe for reconquest. Sleep lightly, citizens of the Imperium. The ancient dead are stirring, and they are very, very angry about what you've built in their absence. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of Warhammer 40k's most terrifying scenarios, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. There's so much more darkness to explore in the grim future of the 41st millennium, and we're just getting started. Leave a comment, letting me know what topic you'd like to see covered next. Until then, remember that in the darkness between the stars, ancient evils wait with patience measured in geological ages. And sooner or later, every secret buried in the past finds its way back to haunt the present.